Profiles in Cinemania. Terence Stamp in Memoriam. Head down to Cheapside in London, a thoroughfare that's been in use since before the year began with a 1, and you'll come to the 1,000-year-old site of St. Mary Le Bow, an ancient church. Of course, the church you see nowadays has been built, burnt down, rebuilt, drowned, rebuilt, fallen in a swamp, and rebuilt a few more times. To most of the local folk, though, what matters is the Bow bells. This set of bells has rung out over all London town since before anyone knows for sure, because the concept of writing things down then was still a bit shaky. Legend has it that if ye be lucky enough to be born within earshot of those bells, then no matter where you go in this world or the next, no matter what you become and why, you will forever be a cockney. And in 1938, the bells rang out on the birthday of Terence Stamp. You might say on that day they had to peal before Zod. Being born on the eve of World War II, comforts would have been few and far between. At age 4, his life was forever changed when his mother tried to give him a comfort and took him to the cinema. Unbeknownst to his well-meaning mom, this fateful Gary Cooper cowboy picture afflicted the young Terence Stamp with a lifelong case of cinemania. As he was the son of a tugboat driver who grew up in London during the Blitz, Stamp described cinema as having been, quote, the only light in an otherwise bleak existence, end quote. He states that he is reserved and solitary. Such social stunting he blames on his choice to spend every spare moment in the cinema, a state which the members of this society understand on a fundamental level. Back then, however, the cinema was not just entertainment, it was also education and social glue and pretty much the primary source of the news for many. It would not be a stretch to assume that he saw more the occasional newsreel before Zod. All right, that was the last one. Promise. Probably. As Stamp grew to manhood, a job counselor advised him to become a bricklayer, so he did the only sensible thing. Went right out and got a job at an ad agency. One evening after he saw James Dean in Rebel Without a Cause, Stamp knew that instead of working in an ad agency, that acting would be the life for him. He initially started in local theater, but despite his early work being, in his own words, quote, shit, unquote, it was still good enough to earn him a scholarship to Webber Douglas Academy of Dramatic Art. After Webber, Stamp began working the theater scene throughout the UK, eventually resulting in a national tour of the show The Long and the Short and the Tall. One of Stamp's castmates was a fellow Cockney, perhaps the best-known Cockney of all time, Michael Caine. When you're an up-and-coming actor in 60s London, and you're hanging out with the likes of Michael Caine, then you can pretty much forget about having a normal life, it seems. You might say that his fate was sealed before Zod. Got in another one. They became fast friends, and after having been on the road for so long, they had both developed a tolerance of living in close quarters with another actor. No mean feat. Stamp and Caine thus decided to share a flat together so each could pursue his career. Incidentally, Caine has told various tall tales about their time together, each a taller tale than the last. It was a time and a place when anyone could just decide to become whatever they felt like. He recounted a story about how he was chatting to Terence's brother Chris one day, and the lad mentioned that he had decided to try being a manager for a few mates who had decided to form a band. You know, just to see how it went. Turns out they were The Who, and you might have heard about them. It was just that kind of crazy scene, man. What a spiel before Zod! Incidentally, the writer of Withnail and I states that his story was personal and says nothing, absolutely nothing, about it having had to do with Stamp or Caine in any way. Why are you even asking? Though he would later become an LGBT icon as Priscilla, Queen of the Desert in 1994, in stacked glittery platform heels before Zod. Stamp has always identified as straight, even to the point of seducing and sleeping with the girlfriends of everyone responsible for starting and spreading the rumor that he and Michael Caine were in a same-sex romance, at least according to a completely different modern rumor being spread across social media. Stamp's breakout role was in 1962 as the title character in Peter Ustinov's cinema adaptation of the Herman Melville novel Billy Budd, where critic Bosley Crowther described Stamp as having a, quote, sinewy, boyish frame in the face of a Botticelli angel, end quote. Crowther wasn't the only one heavy-breathing over Terence Stamp. Though the world was overcome with Beatlemania in 1963, Stamp won the title of World's Best Looking Man, which he held for 7 straight years, 1963 to 1969, or the most meaningful part of the 60s. The Beatles may have been bigger than Jesus, but they weren't better looking than Terence Stamp. Scream for the Beatles, yes, but squeal before Zod! For all of his swinging 60s adventures, and they were very swinging and very 60s, there were certainly more than a few almost wers for every can't believe that was. Stamp was nearly the epitome of British icy cool when he was considered for the role of Bond, James Bond, after Sean Connery quit the role, but apparently his ideas for how he wanted to approach the role were just too rough and tumble for the producers. Apparently he, quote, put the frighteners on, end quote, producer Harry Saltzman. Sadly, there was to be no license to kill before Zod. Well, they can't all be winners. He was nearly the ultimate 60s swinging Lothario on screen when he was offered the iconic role of Alfie in the movie of the same name, but he turned it down for other work, and the job went to his old mate Michael Caine, which turned out to be Caine's breakout performance. Still, Stamp got to do his own Italian job, heading off with Fellini to work in Italy for a few years on an ensemble piece based on the works of Edgar Allan Poe called Spirits of the Dead. The Italian climate seemed to agree with him. He stuck around to work with notable Italian nutter Pier Pasolini. But it wasn't all work, you know. He still found time to rampage through the phone book of eligible ladies like a cockney sex tornado on tour. As the world's best-looking man, naturally Stamp's love life was subject to a lot of media coverage. Notable among his dalliances were some of the decade's most notable women, including actresses Brigitte Bardot and Julie Christie, as well as British supermodel Jean Shrimpton. After his breakup with Shrimpton, Stamp packed it in and moved to India to live at the ashram of Jiddu Krishnamurti, where his studies eventually earned him the rank of Swami. Unfortunately, nobody here at the Cinemania Society can tell you what the fuck that actually means. Moving on. Because actions can perhaps sometimes occasionally have consequences, it was in 1971, right around the same time as he departed for India, that Terence Stamp's career fell off a cliff, where it remained throughout most of the come-down decade. We've all had breakups like that. Some girls, they really get you now. They get you so you can't sleep at night. Oh, yeah. One fateful day in 1976, Stamp got a telegram. Although it was misaddressed to Clarence Stamp, it read, "You have scenes with Brando." All that meditation and clean living and Swamiing went right the fuck out the window. You might say the role held a lot of appeal before Zod. And so it was, Stamp returned to the world of showbiz to take the role for which he would be forever remembered by not only this society, but the entire rest of the video rental generation. General motherfucking Zod. Not only did he play General Zod opposite Brando, just as promised for the 1978 film Superman, he reprised the same role in Superman 2 as the main villain. Fun fact, Superman and Superman 2 were originally a single script that got split into 2 parts because it was so damned long. Too bad this didn't happen with the scripts to The Blues Brothers and Ghostbusters, but I digress. It was a hell of a movie. Deal before Zod! Although his performance in the Superman movies was indeed iconic, the 80s largely passed Terence Stamp by. In 1984, however, the cover of a single by The Smiths featured a still of Stamp holding a chloroform pad. It turned out to be a screen grab from the 1965 psychological horror film The Collector, wherein Stamp's character Freddie Clegg stalks, abducts, and kills through neglect the woman who is the focus of his obsession. Why did Morrissey choose this image from this movie of this charming man? Well, come on, should be obvious. It's Maz we're talking about here. He's got a shyness that is criminally vulgar. While Stamp's performance earned a Palme d'Or, Morrissey's almost earned him a lawsuit. Stamp initially rejected the use of his likeness for the cover of this record, so it was reissued with Morrissey reenacting the shot holding a glass of milk instead of a chloroform pad. However, the original version was restored once Stamp relented and gave his permission. So what difference does it make? It makes none. In 1999, Stamp relaunched his career with the revenge trip, The Limey. The Limey was a revenge film in the grand tradition of revenge films used to reignite the careers of fading actors like Charles Bronson in the Death Wish series, Liam Neeson in the Taken series, and Keanu Reeves in the John Wick series. Unlike those other films, however, The Limey was a standalone picture. It was also partly shot in Big Sur, and the production of which involved certain members of this society. By the 2000s, Terence Stamp had reached the point in his career where he had been around for so long and had done so much wild and outlandish stuff that he was simply interesting to have around. He added a touch of class to anything he was involved in, and, of course, as a British actor of renown, trademark, he could knock out a villainous monologue as easily as a particularly easy thing. So he did a considerable amount of voiceovers for video games and the like. If you were, say, wandering Tamriel, closing portals to oblivion, or gunning down an existential threat to the cosmos at any time recently, Ultramarines the movie, there is a fair chance that you heard voices performed by good old, bad old Terence Stamp, and you can't say fairer than that. Not a bad life, really, when you think about it, especially for a Cockney kid out of nowhere who got told he was probably better off just buckling down and heaving bricks for a living, using the traditional bricklayer's tool used for transporting bricks. You know, kneel before hard. Okay, that really is the last one. What matters is, when the time is right and the place is London and you have balls of British steel, you can damn well make yourself into anything you want to be, and don't let anyone tell you otherwise. Just so long as you remember, mate, you're still a Cockney. This has been another profile in Cinemania. This episode was written by Ethan Ireland and Andy Slack, and was performed by Ethan Ireland. Music by Carl Casey at White Bat Audio.